Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast as we continue our reread of A Court of Mist and Fury. In this episode today, we are going to be talking about chapters 33 through 48. And just like recently, I want to dive in right away. But very quickly before I do, I want to give the same disclaimer that I have been giving, which is that this read-along is a reread for me. So I have read the ACOTAR series before. However, this is the first time that I'm recording podcast episodes about it. But all of that to say, there will likely be spoilers in what it is that I talk about in this episode. And so I do like to give that context and a spoiler warning. All right, I just have to go ahead and dive in because whether you are reading this for the first time or you are doing a reread, you now know, if you have read this section of the book, where we end up at the end of chapter 48. And oh my God, I am so giddy. I am so smiley. If you are a romantasy person, that chapter is just all of the goodness that we love to see in romantasy. In my opinion, it is just all of it. And I'm going to try to figure out how to describe what I mean by that. But it is nervousness. It is a little bit of anxiety. It is like stripped down raw truth. It is vulnerability. It's tension. It's sexual attraction, honesty. Like it's all of the things that make romantasy what you want it to be. You have this female main character who is taking you through, like, I can't begin to stress enough, which I have already said in every episode, and I've even said before I started recording SJM content, her writing so easily allows my imagination to put myself in the place of these characters. It is so easy to feel and be in the moment of what they are experiencing. What makes it so good is that you can feel the build, you can feel the tension, you can feel all of these things that Feyre is feeling when she is in this small attic of a room with this ridiculously powerful man. And especially with everything that led them to be here, it is just almost undescribable at the way that it feels and the amount of giddiness that happens when they finally come together. Even though it is not a full-blown sex scene, for them to have intimacy and almost have this intimacy in this way where they're just skirting the surface and you as a reader already feel so giddy and excited and whatever about it, means that when the time comes for them to fully experience each other and have each other in the ways that they're talking about, that you know it's going to be electric. So it's not even just the moment, it's the fact that this is now like a breadcrumb to what's to come. And there's something about that specifically here in this book that wasn't there with Tamlin. So let me kind of wrap up my thought of what I'm trying to explain for this scene briefly, and then I want to talk about the progress that has happened between Rhys and Feyre, because I think that is the majority of what I want to talk about for this section of the chapters. To me, what really creates the beautiful, like, picturesque scene that I can put together for this set of chapters, and specifically this last chapter, chapter 48, is that they come into this hut, Rhysand goes downstairs to get food, Feyre starts to get undressed, and everything about it, the way that it is described, I can just seriously picture every single thing, from the moment of her talking about how hard it is to get her wet clothes off, to the way that certain clothes felt when she put it on, to how she then was sitting on the bed and how she was taking in a moment of realization that this big, beautiful man was about to come back in this room, and how she realized, like, oh, we're going to be in here together, way before she even knew how she was going to act or what she was going to do. Like, that anticipation and that nervousness, even if nothing was going to happen because she didn't know, she had no plan, but just like that moment of panic. It's like when you know you're going to be alone with somebody that you like for the first time, or at least in an intimate setting, meaning that the room itself or the situation is small and intimate, not that you are going to be intimate. But there is a nervousness and a butterfly feeling that comes with that. And I truly could feel that coming through the pages and the way that she's kind of setting up the scene. And it's not that she's going into great detail about it in the sense of saying that Feyre is experiencing butterflies, but it's just in these little blips that you get of scenery that you were experiencing as a reader from Feyre's point of view. you can just feel it. You can feel this build of anticipation and of what their interaction is going to be. And even when, he comes back, she's eating, the description of how he's stripping off his clothes and she's just trying to eat and not, ogle him, and just everything about the way that it is captured of how small the space is and how tense the moment is and how big he is and how much room he takes up, not just with his height and his size of muscled body, but then his wings too. Just all of it is compounding on top of each other to create this anticipation that just makes you smile so big, because you're they can't escape each other. They are in this room, and even if nothing goes down in a physical sense, they have to face each other. And it's a point that you can tell and feel that something is going to come of it. So when I tell you, I was reading this section of the book, and I had this moment because I had to pause when I was cooking dinner. I had this moment where I was like, you know what? I actually don't remember the chapter numbers when the sex scenes or spicy scenes really start to happen. And I was glad, it was a happy realization, because I was oh, I'm just going to be surprised by it like the rest of everybody. And look, there are going to be people who are probably look, you're not really an SJM stan and you're not really into these books if you don't have them memorized top to bottom, front to back, know when everything happens, this, that, and the other thing. And it's sure, but also I think what's beautiful about being a fan of hers or a fan of any author is that you can remember so much about it, but honestly, unless you read it a ton of times, over and over and over and over, you aren't going to remember everything. And that's the beauty of it. That is what makes reading so great, is you pick up different things every time. And I don't want to be that person that is oh, I know that this is coming at this scene and whatever and whatever. And that realization hit me, that I knew that sexy things were coming, but I couldn't remember exactly when they were, because I remembered that when I was a reader for the first time, I had at one point looked it up, because ACOTAR was such a big deal when I had read it for the first time, that it wasn't that I wanted to just get to the intimate scenes, but it was all that you would see was about these books and about this series and whatever. Even though when I first read it, it had already been out for many years, it had had this resurgence. And so people had posted posts on social media of what chapters the spicy stuff happened at. And I remember seeing that and saving those. And it was kind of just a marker for me to know in my first read journey. But I didn't internalize that or memorize any of those things. So now that I'm reading it again, I had forgotten that they had this little moment, and especially what he says, leading up to it and all of this kind of stuff. And so I just color me super giddy. I am just so loving this moment, because the way in which Reese is crafted as a character, how smooth he is with his words, but yet it's not in a way of trickery. His honestness and vulnerability paired up against his charming smoothness when he is trying to be kind of suave and I know that I'm hot shit, High Lord Reese, paired with the true, vulnerable, unmasked, just Reese as a person. Those together create such the perfect character for me. He's so layered and complicated in a lot of ways, but yet I understand all sides of it, because we get such a good perspective and explanation of those sides that it's just delicious writing to me. I truly love it. So I rant and I say all of this to say that I was reading along. I was in my little, anxious bubble, nervous basket because of just the proximity of these characters and whatever, not remembering or clocking that this was a chapter where sexy things were going to happen. And Reese or Feyre says, I want two honest truths, right? I don't want it to be about training, please. Just two honest things. And the first thing out of Reese's mouth is I'm just, you know what? You're going to hear this on the recording because it's so good. I'm going to read it to you. And I opened up right to this page. He watched me take a long drink from mine. I'm thinking, he said, following the flick of my tongue over my bottom lip, that I look at you and I feel like I'm dying, like I can't breathe. I'm thinking that I want you so badly I can't concentrate half the time I'm around you, and this room is too small for me to properly bed you, especially with the wings. I audibly gasped when I read that. When I tell you that I truly didn't remember what chapters the sexy time happened in, but I also, they have been bantering for so long at this point. And And really it isn't, like in the time frame of things, it isn't. And I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But it is just, you see these moments of that is how they relate to each other almost. It's not that it's all just purely carnal and like lustful, but they have this banter both in kind of serious ways, but also in flirtatious ways. And the way in which they flirt has gotten increasingly a little bit more risky, which I am going to talk about that. I'm just going to say all of these points that I'm going to come back to. So you get pieces of it, but then he says some shit like that where it's like, it's so sexy because you know that this is the most powerful lord in Prythian. He is a high lord. He is supposed to be feared by everybody, and yet Feyre sees exactly who he is. He doesn't necessarily let everybody see it, but he lets her see it. He wants her to see it, and he is obviously attractive to her in this story and meant to be this just beautiful male. And then he says some shit like this. And that's the Rhysand that I love, the complicated, layered one, where he's not just sitting there saying vulgar stuff to her or whatever. He's being intimate and he's being specific and he's being honest. Like, for him to sit there and say something about the fact of like, I'm thinking that when I look at you, I feel like I'm dying, like I can't breathe. That is just such a vulnerable way to admit your feelings for somebody. It is so gentle and it is so powerful. And then for him to say at the end, I'm thinking about how I want you and how this room is too small for me to properly bed you. Like, that's the cheeky Rhys. That's the sexy high lord. I know that I can bed whoever I want. You know, that's the other side of him. But it's all coming together in this amalgamation of a beautiful confession of him just being like, look, we have been doing this dance, but whatever you think that you have been seeing or picking up from me, I'm just going to spell it out for you that this is exactly what it is. And it's more perfect than I could have ever thought for it to be said. And so that just kicks off the whole thing, right? She obviously is just lost in the sauce at like, oh my God, I can't believe he just said that. And like any woman, you know, kind of panics and whatever. And it's almost like it gets shut down. It's almost like she, what I will say is interesting about this interaction before we really get to the fun stuff is that her first thought was to just kind of stumble over it and be taken aback by it in the best of ways. But then, so I guess not her first thought, her second thought was that she feels so bad and such like a traitor that she could be with somebody so quickly after Tamlin. And so one of the things that I was reacquainted with in this section of chapters is that she had only left 2 months ago. If I remember correctly, I had said that like 3 months had gone by since Rhys had gotten her from the wedding. Well, we find out it's really only been about 2 months. So a ton of stuff has happened in that time span, but she confirms that because she's saying like only a couple months have gone by. How could I have been thinking about him or moved on so fast or whatever, as she grapples with his feelings for him, which I'll talk more about here in a second. But anyway, the whole point is that she's feeling all of these things and she kind of shuts it down. And then when they're in bed together, the obvious physical desires that they have and the attraction that they have to each other won out. And it was always going to. There was never going to be a way where they were going to be that vulnerable with each other and admit those kinds of truths and then be in this tiny ass room together and be physically up against each other and not have something happen. It just, as humans, we don't operate that way. So it makes a lot of sense that they had this intimate moment. Again, I just want to kind of hammer home, it's not just the physicality of it. It's everything leading up to it. It's the picture that is painted for us about this situation and the way that they're feeling and the environment that they're in and all the tenseness around them that has led them into this moment, that even though, again, this is really just scratching the surface of what their physical relationship is going to be and what us as readers are going to experience of that physical relationship, it really just gives you that delicious tension and gratification of them finally allowing themselves to have what they want. And I'm giddy by that because I really just, again, I wasn't really clocking when it was going to happen. I'm getting towards the end of the book, so I knew that something was going to happen soon. But that was a lovely surprise and delight as I finished out this section of chapters. Obviously, I just had to kind of let all of that out because I was just so giddy about it. And it leaves it as a hard chapter for me to end on, but I know that there's other things that need to take place before we get to anything else physical. So it's not like that is going to be a lead in to anything else immediately. So I feel okay with that being the place at where I had ended, but obviously it was the first thing on my mind coming into recording, so needed to share my thoughts about it. Now, when I think about everything that has happened over this set of chapters, there is a lot that goes down, and we continue to get pieces of everybody's stories, and again, the relationships of all of these characters are coming into clearer and clearer view. I'm actually going to jump for a second and I'm going to shelve Rhysand and Feyre because I want to talk about what happened with Amren and Feyre when they get the book from the Summer Court. A lot of the interactions that happen in the Summer Court lead into a lot of the tension with Feyre and Rhysand and some intense conversations. So I don't want to dive into that necessarily in this. But when I found myself taking a break to cook today, I was just laughing because one of the parts that I had stopped at was right after Feyre and Amren had gotten the book. And in that part of the story, Feyre and Amren, when they get saved by, well, not saved because Rhysand did not save them, but when he brings them back and winnows them back to Velaris, and I had stopped right at that point when I was cooking earlier, and so I had a moment to reflect on just that and really understand the ridiculousness of the situation. Because here's the thing. On one hand, Rhysand was, this was nighttime, right? So he's kind of hovering above, assessing the situation. But he has this powerful, otherworldly being, Amren, who we don't know a lot about, but obviously Rhysand does to a degree more than we do from Feyre's perspective. So he knows that she can kick ass and take names. And then you have Feyre, who is a little unhinged in terms of not having control over her powers, but is very capable and who he bet on from the very beginning when he didn't even know her. So he has the utmost faith in them. But you have these two people who are seemingly very important to him and very important to his cause, almost drown because they get trapped and their powers don't work in this temple. And so for them to get saved by water wraiths who are from what I can tell, pretty vile creatures, for two of arguably the most powerful people in Rhysand's world to have died because they drowned would have been obviously terrible in the story, but it would have just been a joke. It's what do you mean? What do you mean they drowned? It's just unfathomable. So the fact that not only almost happened, but then the way in which they got saved, it makes so much sense that there was just this delirious laughter of you got to be kidding me. It's just got to be a joke. And so that's why the whole situation is so funny, because when they get out of the water and they're finally on the shore, Rhysand shows up and is what the hell happened? And is kind of explaining what he was seeing and experiencing. And Amren's you freaking idiot. We almost drowned. And he's what do you mean? You could see that he never thought, it never crossed his mind that would ever be a factor. And it's kind of funny because it's how though? Of all of the years of experience, decades, centuries that he's been alive, and Amren, they, think about all these things, about wards and all this possible stuff. So to not have thought that they not only might have been trapped inside, but that their magic could have been nullified was kind of silly to me, right? It's kind of how could you not have thought of that? But it's also Rhys was the backup. He was supposed to be the safeguard if something did happen. But his explanation in that moment was every alarm just started to go off and these guards just started to freak out, so I had to handle them. It's almost he panicked. And so he was just reacting in the way that he knew in the time, which he talks about later. And he doesn't really think about actually going to save them. And so it is very possible that he could have just been trying to dispatch guards for so long that they would have drowned. And how tragic would that have been? But it's just so, irony isn't the right word, but it is. It's kind of ironic that you have these powerful women and this being in Amren and whatever, and they had no way out. There really wasn't a way out. So I say all that to say that the one thought that struck me is, one, this was one of my favorite Easter eggs from the series, because what do you mean that the wraiths came? And what do you mean that it wasn't even the wraith that Feyre did that favor for in the spring court with the tithe? It's her sisters. That is the kind of stuff that made me really start to like SJM when I was first reading the series, because it was such a callback to an interaction that I remember when I very first read it, I was just so blown away by it. I'm what do you mean they came back to save them? In this moment where you really feel like all hope is lost. Because let me tell you this, I knew that the Wraiths were going to come, obviously, but even in my reread, I was never thinking about Rhys. He never crossed my mind because I was so immersed. SJM has this way, as I've always said and will continue to say, and I'm sorry about it, and it's a broken record, but her writing allows me as a reader to get so immersed that you were just in it, punch for punch, moment for moment, and you really are only thinking about what the characters are thinking about. You have no consideration. So when certain things outside of that situation that you're in happen, it's either such a relief or like an added gut punch or whatever. So I'm not thinking about Rhysand. I'm not like, where is this man? And it isn't just because I know that he's not the one to save them. Truly, like, I know that sounds kind of crazy because it's like, well, obviously your brain knew that he wasn't going to be the one. But like, genuinely, I can say I was so immersed in the writing that I was so worried about how they were going to get out or what they were going to do. It never crossed my mind for them to be saved by a man because honestly, they are such powerful women. If they couldn't have gotten out, like, what are we even talking about, right? But the other thing about that is beautiful that I'm now just realizing is that the Wraiths are female. I'm pretty confident that they are all female. So for females to save females, that is just kind of like a cool moment. But the one thing that hit me when I was having this realization when I was taking my break to cook earlier was that how the hell did the Wraiths get them out? If powers didn't work on the inside, sure, you could argue power worked on the outside, right? So if it had been Rhys, he could have blasted the door or done something or whatever. But Wraiths don't have powers as far as I know. I don't think they're really talked about as being powerful beings. Again, they're kind of just talked about as being like sketchy and not like great creatures. So when you're in the story, it talks about like the door being blasted out or something like that. What I was curious about today was, is it because of the debt, that the debt overruled the magic holding the door that allowed them to save them? And then it got me thinking, it's not even possible, right? Like, you have this ancient magic that is protecting this ancient book that nullifies Feyre's power, who is a made being, that nullifies Amren's power, who is otherworldly, and the door that is sealed shut can just kind of be opened by Wraiths. That doesn't make sense to me. But I also have a hard time with believing that this life debt, so to speak, like you could say that what Feyre did in giving that Wraith her jewelry in the first place in order for her to be able to pay the tithe was a life debt, because she inevitably would have never been able to pay, and then she would have been in more debt, and then eventually like bigger repercussions would have come, even if it would have been a while. She would have never gotten out of that because the lands are dying, so she was never going to win. So you could say, for all intents and purposes, it's a life debt. And what that makes me think about is the way that they talk about bargains in this book. This action that Feyre did towards this Wraith, this generosity, she never did it in order to have the Wraith be in her debt. It was not a bargain. So there was no magical obligation involved other than the respect of like a debt for a debt, right? Or like, I owe you, right? A favor for a favor, basically. Even though, again, that wasn't Feyre's intent. But I say that because is it possible that that kind of repayment can overpower such a strong magic that's keeping an object in place? And I may be missing something. Like, people may be screaming into the void, like, how do you not know that that is exactly what could happen because of XYZ things and examples? But really, when I was thinking about it earlier today, I was just kind of puzzled by that, because I was like, I don't recall that really being a possibility. But in this moment, I was extra aware of how the Wraiths got them out, and it's not really explained other than them being like, our sister's debt is repaid. And obviously that's just part of this whole joke, and it's like so ridiculous the situation is. But I don't know. I'm curious about that, and I find it very interesting, but I clearly don't have an explanation for it. It's just a thought that I had that I wanted to share. So definitely is a question that I have. And if anybody has a good explanation of if that is the case, and if that kind of debt can outweigh that kind of magic, please inform me, because clearly I'm not connecting any dots if I should be seeing them. So outside of that funny situation happening, we also start to get more in regard to Mor's story. In this set of chapters, this is the first time that Mor is referred to as the Morrigan. I think that phrasing is what has started a lot of fan theories online about what Mor's power is and who she is and what she's capable of. And I think that more of that will kind of come out as we get closer and closer to the new book. And certainly, of course, whenever I read it, because I have no doubt that she is somehow going to be in that to some degree. I think she kind of has to be, but then I also have said in the last episode that I wasn't exactly sure that she would be. So I don't know. It's really hard for me to figure out where she fits in it all. But why I bring that up is because when they have this interaction with the queens for the first time, Mor is the one that kind of has this speech and is like, enough. Like, we're not doing this bickering. We're not having this back and forth. Here's the situation at hand. Here's the reality. And here's what we need. And either be on board or not, basically, right? And she doesn't say it that way because she doesn't want them to not be on board. But when she is addressed, one of the queens says, like, I know who you are. I know you're the Morrigan. And the other queens are like, oh. And so what's interesting about that is it's the first time that her power or whatever it is that she's done or whatever it is that she's capable of doing, or both, is you're seeing it from another character's perspective that's not in the inner circle. So again, we know that Mor's powerful. We know how Rhys has described her. We know the position he has in her court. She is not somebody to be messed with. That is already established, but you don't know what that means. Kind of like Amren. And so with this interaction with the queens, you still don't have the full picture, but you're seeing these outside people beyond just this core circle of friends that are recognizing her and realizing like, oh, that's you. It doesn't much make a difference in the interaction that happens, but I think that it's notable to mention it because the other time that we see Mor really come into action in this story is when they are at the Court of Nightmares. There, she's not really revered. Like, people don't mess with her because she is a part of Rhysand's court, but you can see the way in which they look at her and kind of how they regard her, which is with like a hatred and a disgust. Obviously, because a lot of it is like her family and her lineage and her people of where she comes from, but they treated her like trash, right? So they know not to mess with her, but it's only because of Rhysand. Otherwise, they just think that she's trash. That's the vibe that you get. So you have these two opposite ends where it is just so reinforced for you, this mask and what they want people to believe about them, but then you see who they really are when they're with each other in the inner circle and the version of them that Feyre sees. And those things are so at odds with each other, but you get such a good perspective of both sides that it really helps you to start to understand just how cunning they are and the lengths to which they go to be able to protect their friends and their family and their people, like their found family. This group of people in this inner circle of Rhys's will do anything for each other. And that is said time and time and time again. But it's different when you see it in action. This is the first time when we go to the Court of Nightmares that I feel like you see kind of everybody in action aside from Amren, because she's not there, where you see everybody playing this role and putting their quote unquote masks on. And it, in my opinion, it helps you as a reader really understand just the gravity of what they're trying to do and how deceptive that they have to be, but for the right reasons of protecting what they hold dear. The fact that there are people like the queens of the mortal realm who recognize Morrigan when that name is said and understand her role in the war, and there is some reverence there, but yet you have people who are in the Court of Nightmares who seem to just disregard that. It just really goes to show the juxtaposition of the types of people that they deal with and how they have to kind of switch back and forth. And unfortunately, what that does when they are trying to kind of give people a little glimpse of their truth, right? When they're in front of the queens of the mortal realm, they are not fully masked off like they are with Feyre, but they are more themselves than they are at the Court of Nightmares. And the queens don't believe that. They don't buy into their authenticity or their generousness or whatever. And so the whole story, right, is they're going to have to kind of reveal something to get these queens to believe them, which is total bullshit. Because you as a reader, of course, understand the juxtaposition of all of this and the different sides of all of it, and you just want to scream from the rooftops that these queens are idiots, and you agree with Elaine when she's like, they should just burn in hell. It's kind of like, yeah, this is so ridiculous that you even have to do this. You're such good people. You're doing things for all the right reasons, seemingly, and to have to defend that in order to get help, but then to have to go and reinforce the fact that you're terrible people and that that's the lie and that's the mask. It's just such a weight, and it's like, you know it, but then when you see it as a reader and you see the perspectives and you're in the perspectives, that weight to me becomes much more realized, and that picture is much more clear. So I just wanted to comment on that because, again, we get more of Moore's backstory in these chapters. We understand exactly what happened and, you know, what went on with her and Cassian and Azrael. But we also see a little bit about her politically in two very different scenarios. And I wanted to just comment on it because this is kind of the first time that has really happened and that we see them in action, right? We saw Amren with Feyre. It was a little bit of a political situation, but mostly Amren came into play when they were getting that damn book. And then we see Morgan here in this situation where she's more in play on these two separate scenes and the political side of things, both with the queens and then at the Court of Nightmares in that situation. And so it's just interesting to kind of start to see these different sides of the characters and be able to really put it together with descriptive scenes and interactions with other characters. Now, where that leads me is to kind of my main point for these chapters, which really ties back to Feyre and to Rhysand. The main thing that is sticking out to me is what happens after they get back from the Court of Nightmares. So, speaking of kind of like sexy tension, there's that moment before they go to the Court of Nightmares where Rhysand is like, Feyre, I don't know that I can like have you do this. And he gives her spiel and whatever. And she's like, well, no, I'm going. Just tell me what you need me to do. And we know from her perspective that she understands the full weight of what is happening. And essentially she now has to play the role of Rhysand's whore, just like he was Amarantha's whore, kind of, right? The difference, which they don't really talk about, but the difference that I want to point out is that Rhysand was never affectionate towards Amarantha in public. When they were under that mountain, everybody knew what he was, but at least for the time when Feyre was there during those 3 months and during those trials, and when we as a reader were in scenes from her perspective where Rhysand was with Amarantha, there was zero affection. There was nothing about it that was ever like willing. Whereas in this situation, even though Feyre is supposed to kind of play this role of being his like plaything, she's giving into it. She is allowing him to, seemingly to the audience, she is okay with this behavior and leaning into it and letting him be this guy. And that's part of his whole shtick, right? He's never seen as one to force anybody when it comes to this kind of attention. He's always seen as one where women like flock to him, beings flock to him, like they want him. And when he entertains that, it's a willingness. They don't explicitly talk about or say that it's a consent and willingness on both sides, but you get this vibe as a reader and from all of the things that haunts Rhysand, that it will never be a situation where she is forced. And so, of course, you can say that other characters that are in this Court of Nightmares could think that. They could think he's mind controlling her and making her do these things and whatever. But the outward look is always of willingness. And so, again, they don't talk about that by any means, and they don't go into great lengths about that specifically. But I do think that it's important to mention that I have noticed that. And I think that it's very important to Rhysand and his trauma that it comes across that way, that she is a willing participant. Now, of course, we as the reader know she very much is a willing participant, not only for the greater good of the mission, but this is the first time where they really start to be physical with each other. And yes, it's in public. And yes, you know, you're kind of icky from it because you're like, you're in this Court of Nightmares and you're doing it for this mission and it's not genuine, but it is. And what adds to that is, of course, Feyre's perspective, which she's starting to go through these things where you're seeing her react to his touch and being human and just, you know, giving into the lust. But then she has this thought as certain interactions happen with him or he responds in certain ways where she's like, oh, maybe he doesn't want me to touch him like that. Maybe he doesn't like this whole thing because of what had happened with Amarantha. Like her mind starts to step away from just the human, like, giving into this sensual desire to the reality of the situation and being like, oh, I never once thought about the fact that he may not be okay with this. And right as she's having that realization, they're done with this whole situation and they leave, right? And so the first thing that happens is him and her have this dialogue that turns into this fight. And this is where Feyre says some shit that is a dagger. And The thing that I want to explain about this, and I'm going to do my best to be concise about it, is that Feyre, in my opinion, while she hasn't always said what's on her mind, when she really wants to, she will. And when she does, she's never really been afraid to do it. She may regret, but she's never been afraid to do it, right? What I think is important about that is that the last time that we saw that in a significant way when that had happened was with Tamlin, when he basically blew up the office. And had she not deflected his explosion with her own power, she would have been hurt by whatever shrapnel had come out of that office. He was only enraged. It was never about her protection. She self-protected, and she was only able to do that because she was immortal. If she was a human, she probably would have been severely hurt by that happening. So there was a lot of trauma around that, right? I don't personally, as a reader, feel like I have seen her really limit what she says out of a fear of that same reaction happening. The only time that we ever really see her getting a little fearful is when it's like not included in plans or not cued in on things or not being given a decision. She will always call that out and always bring that up every time. Like, don't do that to me. Don't be like him, whatever. But she's never worried about saying stuff like that to him or saying the truth that she feels in worry of his reaction. I've never gotten that impression, right? So we come off of this tense thing happening, and Rhys is kind of bearing his soul to her a little bit in this moment. But it's not even that. I think it's more that he's just so ashamed, or he's like, I really hate that I just had to do that and that you had to see that, which is so crazy because you come out of this moment just like Feyre, where you're getting touched by this beautiful man and he's making you feel all of these things, and you're, doing it for the mission, and just this kind of lustful, dangerous situation, and you're finally getting to like have physical touch with this person that just kind of seems to always be feet away or mere inches away and never within your grasp. And then instantly it's all gone, and you have to realize that this is not fun and games. This is very, very hard for him, and it's very, very tough for him. But to me, I think it's a little bit of that she's reacting to, the suddenness of it, the sudden shift. I think that shift of emotion, it's a little bit hard for her to process, which rightfully so. You think that you're kind of in this moment, and you remember that it's for a purpose and a mission, and it's not quote unquote real, even though, realize that part of that was very real for Rhysand too. But in the moment, she's not sure that it was real. She feels kind of like a fool. He's feeling really vulnerable or embarrassed and whatever. And all of these things just kind of start tumbling out. In this moment, she then ends up saying to him that, well, you never want to open up to people, right? She basically says like, what, you're so afraid that they're going to see exactly who you are and exactly what your weaknesses are and think that you're not worth it. Something like that, right? And she knows the minute that she says it that she wounded him. And so we see her kind of sulk, and we see him take some time and whatever. They end up figuring it out, of course. But that's the first time where she's been snappy before and she's been mean before. But it was the first time where I feel like I felt like she was cruel. It was like she was so focused on what she was feeling in that moment, and she couldn't fully grasp everything that he was feeling, even though she knows it. She knows what he's feeling. And her emotions just went out in that moment, and she said something nasty, and she was cruel. And she even says, like, I used his moments and his vulnerabilities that he shared with me, I used it against him. How unfair that is, right? And what I found interesting that I also want to comment on really quickly is that when she's trying to write him letters and he won't take any of them, the one that he finally takes has a line in it that I also think was cruel, where she says something like, you're just like a hateful coward. I do think that it is intentional by SJM that that's the letter that he snatched finally, because in that moment when Feyre is looking at it as she's getting ready and you realize that it's gone, I as a reader was like, not that one. Like, of all the ones, why do you have to take that one? And what I think is important about that is because it starts to sow this seed even more than before. Because here's what happens. She has regret. So from the moment that she says those words, we're in her perspective and we see her trying to reach out, right? So you know that she's regretful and you're going through this with her, but then she goes from being regretful to being mad and to being a little bit sassy. And that's when she says something else mean in writing. But when he takes that, it's like the regret is amplified. Because from your perspective, from Feyre's point of view, it's like I felt so many things and I want to say so many things to you and I'm trying to mend this bridge, and you take the one letter when I'm frustrated, not days ago when I was empathetic and sorry. And so there's this moment where you get a little nervous, if that's the right word, or a little bit of anxiety. And that is the part about the writing that I appreciate, because then she's sewing these moments together of leading up to when they are inevitably going to have a conversation and meet again and talk through things, where you're supposed to feel that way, because that's exactly how Feyre feels. When you care about somebody so much and you screw up and you say the wrong thing and you want to make it right, but then another wrong thing comes out, or it's not the right time, or you say it in the wrong way or whatever, like I feel like there are a lot of ways that this is going that people can identify with when you have a crush or you're in love with somebody or you have feelings for somebody, that it's so easy to then be put in that situation of this character and to feel that little bit of panic when it's like, not that letter, like of all the letters, that's the one that you took. And of course, when they have a conversation after they meet up, for Rhysand to be like, oh, well, I didn't want you to think that I was just an ungrateful coward, or whatever she had called him. It's like, oh, damn. Like, I know you saw it, I know you read it, but like, I really didn't want, you know what I mean? And so, of course, one of the first things out of Feyre's mouth is like, it truly was not okay. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And she was very genuine about it. And there was nothing in regard to her covering her ass. It wasn't anything at all. She was very sincerely, genuinely sorry. And the thing that I appreciate about them is, even in the most awkward of moments, even in the most misconstrued moments, when they are together, when they do say words, it feels like they're able to unravel so much of that possible confusion. And I appreciate that, because one of the things that's really hard for me as a reader is when the miscommunication trope like goes on and on and on, and it's like the chaos just gets worse and worse and worse. And it's like, you couldn't have just had a conversation. You couldn't have just really talked it out and been honest about what you wanted or where you were at. That shit kills me. And so even though the conversation that they have that kind of soothes all of this over isn't really this full conversation, but it's just enough to get them back on the right foot, I appreciate that. And I love that about SJM's style, that she doesn't let that shit linger for too long. So I say all of this to say that these interactions of them having intense things happening, more increased flirtation, being in danger together, Feyre still surprising Rhysand, which is one thing I want to talk about that I didn't mention in regard to the wraiths, but I'll come back to. All of that stuff is leading up to this moment in this attic, in this town, in this little hodinky inn, and that's what makes it good. That's what really fires me up when it comes to romantasy, is that whether or not you know that it is a build, there is tension being weaved and intimacy being weaved and seeds being planted to something beautiful when it comes to their relationship and their love and their feelings for one another. And I appreciate the shit out of that so much. Now, the last couple of points that I want to make is the one that I just touched on, which was the fact that Rhysand is like ever surprised by Feyre. At that point when Amren and Feyre were kind of hysterically laughing in regard to the whole wraith situation, Feyre says that, you know, they catch their breaths. She finally lets Amren just like tell the story, and she looks up at Rhys and he's just like staring her down, and she, you know, shoots a thought down the bond or whatever. And he says something in return in regard to like, to the huntresses who like don't leave anyone behind. That moment, that little intimacy, that little quip, few sentences, half a page, whatever it is, where you see that and can so clearly feel their connection, that's the kind of stuff that time and time again, it's not just that it's happening over and over, but it's being built upon and they're getting more and more intense. Those moments, that's the good shit. That's the stuff that I was just talking about. And it's not just that it happens, it's that it happens well. This is a moment where Feyre is so exhausted. She's just absolutely wrecked. But she's like, yeah, Amren, like, go ahead, tell the story, right? Kind of minding her own business, and looks up to see this stunning High Lord staring at her across this table. And she can mind speak to him to say some cute little quip about, like, you know, to the dreamers or whatever. Like, she's reading his look as like, look, I know it's ridiculous, and I know that this story is absolutely nuts, but I did everything that I could because I too have dreams. Like, I am one of you in that way, right? Like, this is for the dreamers. Like, we fought because we have to, right? Like, she's kind of saying in that line that I am in this and I am part of this with you, because he didn't know what happened in that temple. he got them out so fast and it was all just chaos, and he didn't know the story. He was hearing it for the first time. So he's looking across the table at this woman who is but I don't even know if she's 30 years old in the human world. I don't actually think that she is. And she has been immoral for 5 seconds. She not only released them of all this shit with Amarantha, but he is learning to care and love for her very deeply. And she, not because of her power, but her generosity for others and that human heart that is so kind and giving and seeing of other people, saved one of the most important people to Rhys, who is Amren, and saved her, who is also very important to Rhys. Like, that alone is crazy. But not only that, if Amren's telling the story in the way in which we saw it, he will hear about every time Feyre put her hand on the door, how her hand transformed into Tarquin's, how much she gave, how she freaking put Amren's legs around her, like hoisted her on her back and was like, bitch, we're going, like, do what you gotta do. She fought tooth and nail to get out of that damn place, and they were gonna die. And it was only because of who she is as a person in a moment of someone else's suffering that ended up saving their life. And that's the kind of shit that I love, because you know that even though none of that is said, even though nothing in between her sentence to Rhys and his sentence back to her addresses none of it, it's all said in the meaning behind their words, in the way that SJM describes how he's looking at her, in the way that she describes how Feyre reacts to him. It is an intimacy and it is a rawness where they are seeing each other. And he's just, I know in this moment, he's looking at her and he's like, this woman never ceases to amaze me. Just when he probably thinks he knows her or has an idea of who she is, she will never stop fighting. She will never give anything than her best in the moments when it matters. She does not flee, she fights. It's just, you can tell that it's not like SJM was sitting there saying that he was looking at her in awe of all that she did in that temple and yada, yada, yada. It's just a quick sentence of her describing his look. She could have said something like he was, awestruck or something like that, but still a few words and then a few sentences exchanged, and you just know it holds so much weight. And so again, having that moment happen after something so funny, but yet terrifying of them, that process of them getting the book. And then more and more of those moments as they go through these struggles and try to figure out where they're at with each other and try to work through this intimacy that's building, and they're not exactly sure, how to go about that or whatever. It is powerful, and it's just undeniable. It just is, and they have a good connection, and they're a very well-written romantic couple, and I will never not think that that is the case. All of that to say, I've talked about quite a bit, and obviously Rhysand and Feyre are a very big central point for me in these chapters. And again, it's if you are doing this read along, you have read all of what I've read. So you know that there's a lot of stuff that happens and a lot of information that we learn, and a lot of things are moving in regard to this attempted path forward at trying to get these weapons to help them during this war, trying to have alliances and all of this kind of stuff. But for me, the things that I've touched on, as I have always said and will continue to say, like, these are the things that stand out and that I have the biggest reaction to. So it's not that the other moments don't matter, but this is what I have my feelings towards right now, because I think that the way that we're seeing these characters and some of these important moments of how they're shown to us as a reader and how they're experiencing each other, to me, these are the things that really stand out and that elicited a lot of reaction from me when I was reading it again. But again, that's not to say that a ton of stuff did not happen in these chapters. And it's really bittersweet, truly, because I am way more than a third of the way through this book. I was realizing that I've been reading about equal amounts of chapters, but as we know, not every chapter is the same length. So I definitely think that this set of chapters is certainly one of the longer ones that I've read in this book. And I do think that it is a longer number of pages than the last set of chapters I'm going to read. But my gosh, I really can't believe that it's already the third episode of Akamath, and that I'm going to be finishing this book in a matter of days and recording that episode, and we're just going to keep on moving on to the next. It's really kind of crazy, and I don't think that I'm ready for book 3, but what I love the most about book 2, and I've said this before, again, I'm so sorry, broken record, but truly sorry, not sorry, is I think it's my favorite book because we're seeing Feyre find herself, but we're also seeing her love in a way that is new to her. And actually, I cannot believe I did not comment on it. This is the last point that I want to make. anytime that Tamlin comes up in this story, it is always in direct comparison to Rhys. And obviously that's happening for many reasons. So I'm not griping on that fact, but I bring it up because the more that she has interactions with Rhys and the more that is implied to us as readers that she is healing, the more that she's realizing how much Tamlin hurt her. And so the place where she ends up at this point of the chapters that I read in this book is that there's a part of her that will forever be grateful for Tamlin. Like, she did love him. She believed with her whole heart that she loved him. And there are things that he brought out in her that she will never not be thankful for, right? Like, she being able to know that the burden of taking care of her family was off of her finally. Even now, with her being with Rhys, she has visited her sisters and they are still in good standing with their wealth. Like, none of it has been stripped. He hasn't gone to mess with them. Like, he's, I know that he thinks that Rhys is fucking with her mind and that it's not her choice, but like, no harm has come to them. Like, he's given them this gift of wealth again and kind of a hope at a life. And that has given Feyre this gift of not necessarily worrying about them in the way that she was before. She will never be able to repay that. Like, that is something that she is forever thankful for. And she talks about him, like, kind of opening her up to what the world is really, right? Like, what life could be and wanting to paint and all of this stuff. But then she also talks obviously about the way that he oppressed her. And so that continues to come up even in this story. But while it's a little bit of the same stuff, he locked me up, whatever, you start to see a little bit of different parts of it, of the way that her mind is thinking about it, right? And she continues to have these thoughts where she's like, Rhysand is the one that fought for me. He helped me through those trials. He was the first one to bet on me when he didn't even know me. He came and he helped me. And the only time that Tamlin showed up was when he wanted to be physical with me. He wanted something. He wanted to fuck me. Like, I think she even says that in the book. Like, he just wanted to have sex with me. And he showed up in that moment of whatever he was feeling, but it was for him. It wasn't for me. He wasn't helping me. Even though, she was disgusted with Rhys at the time, he protected her from getting in trouble from that whole interaction by pretending to be the one that had his hands all over her. And so she's having these moments of just realizing, like, yes, I believe that Tamlin, in his heart of hearts, didn't mean malice. But I also do believe that he got what he wanted. He got his powers back, Amarantha was gone, and he just wanted control. He didn't know what he was doing, he didn't know how to do it, and he wanted control so much, and he was afraid of anything else outside of that he limited what I was able to do, and he limited me as a person. He didn't allow me to even get to know myself and my powers. And the thing that's so crazy about that is when you see Feyre's powers now and exactly how much that she can do, she could have burned his whole fucking house down. Like, yeah, he's a high lord and whatever, but like, when she started freaking out and all those shadows showed up and whatever, if Mor hadn't been there and hadn't been able to handle that could have just imploded. She really could have like killed the entire staff and burned that house down. It's interesting to think about how the story would have gone if she had. If Tamlin had pushed her over the edge. He pushed her right up to that edge and freaking Morgan and Rhys saved her. But if he had really just, nobody had come and she had been pushed over the edge, imagine what that story would have been and how that would have gone. Like, it would have been interesting for him to have such this dose of reality of like, this is what happens when you let power go unchecked. But he just thought, or didn't want to think about what she was capable of or what it would mean or whatever. He just wanted to figure out his court and like restore peace and move forward. And she gets that, and there's logic in that, but it's flawed. Clearly it's so flawed. And that's what she's been saying, right? He never saw me. He never wanted to see what was happening. And so every time that something happens with Rhys, even if it's an argument or whatever, you see her go through this thought process of just exactly why he does what he wants to do, how he talks to her, how he includes her, even if it's not perfect, the attempts at which Rhysand, has for her to come along and to do certain things and be a part of stuff. And that is part of what their fight was when Feyre said the really cruel things to him, is he was like, I'm not him. I will never be him. I will never do that to you. But I'm afraid. Like, I'm afraid for you, right? And that was kind of the beginning of him being like, it's because I care about you. He doesn't say the L word, but it's like, because I love you, I'm terrified, right? But I also know and believe that nobody could love me because of all of the things I do and this mask I put on and all of this stuff. But Feyre also starts to chip away at that and to say things like, I can see you. Like, it doesn't faze me. all of the things you have to do and the mask that you have to put on, I see you and I'm still here. And it takes some time to get there, but his softness and his honesty with her and the way he pushes her, but pushes her in the right way, even though she doesn't see it at the time, all of that stuff she starts to clock over these months. And so that is also the part that builds in the background and happens in every conversation and leads you up to that attic where they're intimate, because those little moments and those little conversations and even the fights all layer into and play a factor in what Feyre ultimately feels. And at the end of the day, she has to feel empowered, but she has to feel safe. She doesn't want to feel safe and trapped. She doesn't want to feel empowered and alone. She wants to feel safe, but surrounded by company and empowered. And that is what Rhys is providing to her. And he's not doing it out of strategy or whatever. He's doing it because he cares about her. And so she is starting to see that come to light. But every moment in which it kind of comes up with Tamlin and this juxtaposition, again, yes, a lot of it is similar, but she's always saying the same things in slightly different ways. And as a reader, it is important because you are just being reminded that this isn't just her throwing a tantrum where she was like, you wanted control and you were terrified and you locked me up. It's so much bigger than that. And even when Lucien shows up and he tries to take her and she's like, you saw me literally wasting away. You saw me literally losing my shit. And because you were afraid and you didn't want to ruffle feathers, you sided with him. The thing that I find important, and the last point that I want to make about all of this, is Feyre gets to a point where she looks around in this inner circle and she's like, they are my friends. And not once in this book has she ever mentioned having friends. And she has a little moment with us in her inner dialogue addressing that, right? What's beautiful about that is as she's kind of, it was either leading up into that or shortly thereafter when she's having this moment with Lucien or whatever, in her inner monologue, she says, if Rhysand ever got to a point of being kind of nutso about things, I would bet my bottom dollar that Cassian and Azriel would never let it stand. They would never not say anything to him. They would never be silent. And that was the gripe she had with Lucien, is it was like, you were weak and you were scared and you let me suffer because of your own shit. And I'm not okay with that. And I have people now who would never do that. It's hard in the moment to see that interaction with Lucien, and it does make me feel sad. But I think I'm just sad because I know the direction in which it goes in. And even though it's a little weird with him, I'm glad that he ends up coming around and realizing. But in the moment, it's just like, damn. Because you have to remember, Lucien doesn't belong in the Spring Court. He was gifted the ability to be there. So from his perspective, which Feyre I think does come to understand, but from his, and again, sorry, but spoiler alert, from his perspective, it's like, I can't argue with the only thing that's giving me safe haven, because where am I going to go? What options do I have? I don't have any. So yeah, if it means that I'm fearful of losing my only home and my safety net by ruffling his feathers and going against him, then I'm not going to do it. And it makes sense, because why would he? Feyre, even though she had been there for months and Tamlin loved her and she broke the curse and all this stuff, yes, that's great, but he doesn't know her. How can you sacrifice your well-being and your opportunity and your safety, even though this person saved your skin and took this curse away? Like, it's just, he can't see it that way. And that's his trauma. So it's not just that I'm always like, Feyre's right, because there is more to him and to his character that she does come to soon find out in later books, but still, like, she can't see it in the moment. It's just about her, which is fine, and I have no complaints about that. But I do want to note that we do get a little bit more of that picture down the road, and so that's why in that moment, it is a little hard to see her talk to Lucien that way. But it needs to be said. He needs to be told, like, you played a part in this, and I'm not brainwashed, and I don't want to be there, and you better not fucking come find me. The tone is set that it's not exactly going to go that way, but I say all of this, and I wanted to come back and touch on all of this before wrapping up this episode, because so much of these chapters, while so much is happening in the background and in the grander story, it's just sowing and weaving this story and planting these seeds to why Feyre ends up loving Rhys, and how she looks at him the way that she does, and how she reveres him, and the way that he treats her and respects her. And that is so inherently important to both of their characters and moral compasses, and we just start to see so much of that. And that's what I really love in these books. I just really love the way that they are developed as characters and how they interact with each other and their games with each other and their playfulness. Again, it's a beautiful written partnership to me, and I love them together as a couple. And so it makes it very exciting for me to kind of see that in full force. But it is hard as a reader because I know that all this other shit is happening in the background. And I know that, we're almost to the end of this book. I have one more section of chapters to read, so we're more than a third of the way through. And there's some stuff that really needs to pop off that hasn't popped off yet. And so I know that we still have to go through a lot of struggle, not even just in this book, but of course in the next one. But I think that this book is one of my favorites of this series because of the fact that it is a little bit of the calm before the storm. You get some hard times, but you're seeing their innocence and their love for each other and their love for their people and their families and their friends. And it's like the beautiful side of what you want to see, right? And so, yeah, when you have to go through this freaking war that they're going to go through and all these people that they're going to have to face, it makes you yearn for these good times again. These are the good times, right? Before all this craziness happens. And even if they don't realize it, you as a reader, and especially doing a reread, you do. So I think that is a big reason why I enjoy this book. All of that to say, I just had so many thoughts and feelings in regard to these characters in this book that I know that the last episode might have been a little bit longer. This one might be a little bit longer, but truly I've been honest along the way that these are, some of my favorite characters and definitely my favorite author. And I'm really, really enjoying this reread. So as always, I thank you all for being here, for doing the read along with me, for any engagement that you provide on the YouTube channel. I appreciate you. I always want to hear your thoughts and feelings about things. Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can connect with us on Spotify as well and follow there and listen to episodes over there, which I would greatly appreciate because that is a new venture for me. So really just starting to feel that out and see how it goes. And then of course you can follow along on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, where all of the episode announcements are posted and schedules are posted as well. So I thank you all so much. Truly, this is just a joy for me, and I hope that you're enjoying it as much as I am. And I hope that you're enjoying these books as much as I am. So thank you for being here, and until next time, friends.